Soothing Tales by Rooks. Tonight I'll tell you a story wrapped in moonlight and quiet mystery. A story about patience, about love that lingers between worlds, and about the whisper that changed everything. So, wherever you are, take a deep breath. Let your thoughts slow down. The night is calm, and the story is waiting. This one is called She Waited by the Window Every Night Until the Whisper Finally Came. Settle in, close your eyes if you wish, and let the story find you. It began with the sound of the old clock. Every night, at exactly 9, the pendulum swung and the woman moved to her chair by the window. Her name was Eleanor, though most people in town simply called her the lady by the window. She sat there, wrapped in her soft grey shawl, her fingers tracing the embroidered flowers on its edge. Outside, the world seemed frozen. The trees swayed gently, the same way they had for years. Across the cobblestone lane, children grew up watching her silhouette against the dim light. No one knew why she waited. Some said she was expecting a letter. Others whispered she was waiting for someone who never returned. But in that small town, where the wind carried the scent of rain and memory, people grew used to the sight. A quiet woman, a lonely window, a silence that never broke. One evening, as the moon rose full and pale, a young boy named Oliver paused in front of her gate. "Mom," he called softly, "who are you waiting for?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "For someone who promised me a story that never ended." Then she turned her gaze back to the stars. And the clock struck 9 once more. Many years earlier, before her hair had turned silver, Eleanor had been a teacher at the village school. She loved words, stories, poems, songs. But more than anything, she loved Thomas, the young man who played the violin at the Sunday fairs. Thomas had a voice that could melt away sorrow. He'd stand by her window, playing her favourite tune, the Garden Waltz. That's how their love began, with music carried by moonlight. One night, beneath the willow by the lake, he took her hand and said, "If ever life separates us, I'll find you again, not by sight, not by sound, but by a whisper." She laughed then, thinking it was just the poetry of a dreamer. But fate, as it often does, had its own cruel verses. War came, Thomas was called away. His last words before leaving were, "Wait for the whisper, Ellie. It'll be me," she waited. Weeks became months. Letters stopped coming, and the music vanished from her nights. Still, she kept her promise. Every evening by the window, as the clock struck 9, she sat, listening. Years turned to decades. People moved on, but Eleanor remained in the same house, untouched by time, it seemed. Children became adults, and adults grew old, telling tales of the lady who waited. At the bakery, Mrs. Henson would sigh, "Poor dear, she's waiting for a ghost." At the post office, Mr. Bell would shake his head, or maybe she's just lost her memory. But in truth, Eleanor remembered everything. The colour of Thomas's coat, the way his laughter filled the garden, the shape of the promise he'd made beneath that willow tree. Sometimes she'd hear footsteps outside, soft, fleeting, like someone hesitant to knock. Once she even heard a faint hum, a note that matched his old melody. Her heart would leap, only to fall silent again. Still, she whispered each night, "If you're out there, my love, I'm still here." And though her voice trembled with age, it carried through the quiet like a candle refusing to go out. One autumn morning, when the air smelled of apple and rain, Eleanor found an envelope in her mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Only her name, written in handwriting that made her breath catch. The ink was faded, but the loops of the letters were the same. Thomas's hand. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was a single sentence, "Keep the window open." "I'm closer than you think," her heart raced. Could it be, after all these years? She showed no one, not the curious neighbour, not the postman who asked if she'd heard from her family. That night, she lit a candle by the window, her chair pulled close. The moon seemed brighter, the air charged, as if the world was holding its breath. And for the first time in 50 years, Eleanor was afraid to blink. It happened on a night when the world outside was quiet enough to hear the sigh of the trees. Rain had just stopped falling. The window pane glistened with droplets that caught the light of her candle. Eleanor sat in her chair, her shawl draped like a memory around her shoulders. She whispered softly, "Thomas." Silence. Then a breeze brushed past her face, and there it was, a whisper, soft, familiar, calling her name. "Ellie." Her eyes filled with tears. The voice was not loud, not clear, but it carried warmth, the kind from being known deeply, beyond years and distance. She rose slowly, her hand trembling as she touched the glass. "Thomas, is that you?" The whisper came again, closer now, from somewhere between the world of breath and memory. "Remember the willow and the promise?" The candle flickered. The clock struck 9, and Eleanor, heart pounding like it hadn't in years, whispered back, "I never forgot." The flame danced wildly that night. Eleanor could feel it. Something unseen was near. The air in her little sitting room changed, the kind of stillness that makes your heart pause before it beats again. Outside, the wind sighed against the house like an old friend returning home. She whispered into the silence, "Thomas, if it's you, give me a sign." The curtain swayed, the candle flickered. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, a faint hum began. The garden waltz. Her breath caught, that melody, the one he had played the night he promised her forever. Her wrinkled hands trembled as she followed the sound, each step slow and careful on the creaking floorboards. It led her to the piano, untouched for years. The keys glowed faintly under the candlelight, and there, upon it, was something that hadn't been there before, a single white feather. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You still remember?" she whispered. "You always did." Morning came soft and grey. Eleanor had hardly slept. The memory of that whisper still lingered, humming faintly in her heart. As she brewed her tea, a knock came at the door, gentle but sure. It startled her. No one had knocked on her door in weeks. On the porch stood a young woman in a travel-worn coat, her hair damp from the morning mist. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Are you Mrs. Eleanor Wells?" Eleanor nodded. The girl smiled, though her eyes looked heavy with something unsaid. "My name's Clara. I found this while sorting through my late grandfather's belongings." From her bag, she pulled out an old leather case, scratched, faded, but unmistakably familiar. It was Thomas's violin. Eleanor's knees nearly gave way. Where did you get this?" Clara hesitated, then said, "My grandfather used to tell stories about a woman by the window and how he played for her once under the moon." Eleanor's hand covered her mouth. "Your grandfather's name?" "Thomas Bell," the girl said. The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of a note that seemed to rise from the violin case itself. Later that afternoon, as the rain began to fall, Clara stayed with Eleanor. They sat by the window together, the same one where decades of waiting had unfolded. Eleanor traced her fingers along the violin case. "He told me he'd return, but I never knew where life took him." Clara's eyes softened. "He wrote letters. I found one, sealed, never sent." She handed it to Eleanor. The paper was thin, the ink smudged, but his handwriting was clear. Her heart trembled as she opened it. "My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, then perhaps I couldn't find my way back in time, but I have never stopped playing for you. Each night I close my eyes, I see your window and the light within it. If ever a whisper reaches you, that will be me, keeping my promise." Eleanor's tears fell silently onto the page. All those years, the stillness, the waiting, and yet, somehow, he had found a way to keep his word. She looked at Clara and smiled through her tears. "He wanted me to know he never forgot." That evening, the wind carried the faintest echo of a tune. It was unmistakable, the garden waltz. Eleanor and Clara stood by the open window, listening. There was no one outside, no musician on the lane, just the soft glow of the moon and the rustle of leaves. Clara whispered, "It's like he's still here." Eleanor nodded, her eyes distant but peaceful. He always said music was the bridge between souls. For the first time in years, she felt warmth instead of loneliness. The kind of peace that comes not from forgetting, but from understanding. The melody swelled for a moment, wrapping the room in invisible arms, then faded, leaving only silence and the beating of two hearts, generations apart but bound by the same story. A few days later, Eleanor asked Clara to walk with her to the old lake. The path was overgrown, the willow still standing, its long branches swaying like the fingers of time itself. Eleanor's steps were slow but sure. When they reached the tree, she smiled faintly. "This is where he made his promise," she said, "under this very willow." Clara knelt and brushed away the leaves near the roots. Something glimmered faintly, a small tin box, rusted and half buried in the earth. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was a photograph, a young Thomas and Eleanor standing by the lake, their hands entwined, and beneath it, a note written on the back. "For when the whisper comes true." Eleanor's lips trembled. She whispered softly, "He knew I would wait." As the wind rustled through the window, a single whisper drifted across the air, faint, tender, almost playful. "Ellie!" Clara froze, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening. "Yes," she said softly, "and this time I'm not afraid to listen." The photograph felt warm in Eleanor's trembling hands, though the wind was cool by the lake. Time had faded its colours, but not the feeling. In that moment, the years seemed to fold. The young woman in the picture looking back at her older self, both held by the same quiet hope. Clara sat beside her on the grass. "He must have come back here," she said softly. Eleanor nodded. "I think he did. Perhaps he left this here for me to find when I was ready." They lingered under the willow, the sunlight filtering through its branches like golden threads. For a while, neither spoke. Then, faintly, just faintly, the wind carried a hum. Not quite music, not quite words, but something between. Eleanor's heart stirred. "It's him again." Clara closed her eyes, listening. "It sounds like he's finishing a song." And for the first time, Eleanor didn't feel haunted by the whisper. She felt held by it. Word of the discovery spread quietly, as things often do in small towns. People began walking past Eleanor's gate again, pausing to look up at the window where she once sat alone. But now they sometimes saw two silhouettes, one older, one younger, sharing tea and laughter. The house didn't look so lonely anymore. Mrs. Henson from the bakery brought fresh bread. The postman began leaving little notes that said, "Good morning, window lady." Even the children waved as they passed, and at night something remarkable began to happen. From the open window, soft music drifted into the streets, the faint sound of a violin. Some said it was the wind playing tricks. Others swore they heard a man's gentle hum blending with Eleanor's voice. Whatever it was, it filled the town with quiet wonder. One rainy afternoon, Clara helped Eleanor clean the attic. Dusty boxes lined the space, relics of a life well lived. In one corner, beneath a pile of old linens, Clara found a small wooden music box. It was carved with tiny stars and vines, delicate and worn by time. When she wound it, the same familiar melody filled the room. The garden waltz. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "He gave me that on our first anniversary," she whispered. "I thought I'd lost it." Inside, tucked beneath the turning mechanism, was a folded slip of paper, yellowed with age. "If the song ever stops, find me by the willow. If it still plays, I am near." Eleanor's tears fell silently. "It's been waiting, all these years." Clara squeezed her hand. "So have you. But maybe it's time to see what he left behind." That night, thunder rolled in the distance, and rain tapped softly against the window, the rhythm of memories returning. Eleanor sat in her old chair, the music box turning beside her. The melody played faintly, almost fading with each loop. She could feel something changing, a presence, a nearness she couldn't explain. Then, through the sound of rain, she heard it again. A whisper, low and steady. "Ellie, open the window." Her heart leapt. She rose slowly, the shawl slipping from her shoulders. With trembling hands, she unlatched the window. The wind swept in, cool, fragrant, carrying the scent of wet earth and lilies. The candle flickered wildly, then steadied. And in the shimmer of lightning, she saw a figure, standing just beyond the gate. Tall, familiar, motionless. "Thomas," she breathed. But when the next flash came, the figure was gone. Only the whisper remained. "Remember the story I promised." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed and glistening. Eleanor sat by the window once more, the violin case open beside her, the photograph and music box on the table. She felt no fear, only calm. Clara entered quietly with tea. "Did you sleep?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "He told me a story last night." Clara sat beside her. "What kind of story?" "The one he promised, the story that never ends." She looked out the window, eyes soft and far away. "He said it begins again each time someone remembers." Each time a heart chooses to wait, instead of forgetting, Clara's voice trembled. "Do you think he'll come again?" Eleanor reached for her hand and said gently, "He never left." The clock struck 9, and as if on cue, the violin played, softly, somewhere unseen. The whisper returned, tender and sure. "I kept my promise, Ellie." Eleanor closed her eyes, tears rolling down her cheeks, not from sorrow, but peace. The days that followed were quiet, filled with a kind of peace that didn't need explanation. Eleanor spent her mornings by the garden, her afternoons with Clara, and her nights beside the window. Though now she no longer waited with longing. She waited with gratitude. One evening, Clara noticed an old drawer she hadn't seen before, a narrow one built into the underside of Eleanor's writing desk. "What's this?" she asked. Eleanor smiled knowingly. "Ah, that old thing. I haven't opened it in years. Inside were keepsakes, a pressed wildflower, a ribbon, and a small stack of letters bound with faded twine. Each one bore Thomas's handwriting." Clara's eyes widened. "You had them all this time?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "No, my dear. They appeared there one morning, long after the post stopped coming. I thought perhaps I'd dreamed them, but I couldn't bear to question it." She untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. "My Ellie, if the wind still carries my voice, know that love travels farther than footsteps ever could. I am nearer than breath, softer than light. Do not grieve the years, they only led me closer to you." Eleanor's voice cracked. "He wrote these for the days I'd forget how to hope." And as she spoke, the air filled once again with the faint hum of a violin. That night, Clara found Eleanor in the music room. The violin lay across her lap, its strings still intact after decades of silence. Eleanor smiled faintly. "He always said music could mend what time breaks." She drew the bow across the strings, the sound fragile, trembling, but alive. The melody of the garden waltz filled the air, each note weaving between past and present. Clara watched, tears in her eyes, as something in the room seemed to shimmer. Not light, not shadow, but presence. As the final note lingered, a soft voice whispered through the music. "Ellie, play it once more." Eleanor closed her eyes and did, her hands steady, her heart calm. When the song ended, she looked toward the window and smiled. "He's home," she whispered. Outside, the wind carried the tune down the lane, wrapping the town in its tender glow. When morning came, the house was bathed in soft gold light. Birds sang from the garden. Clara entered the sitting room quietly. The chair by the window was empty, yet peaceful, as though someone had just left it moments ago. On the table lay the violin, the photograph, and a single white feather. Beside them was a folded note in Eleanor's handwriting. "My dear Clara, do not cry for me. My waiting has ended, and my heart is full. He came, as he promised, not to take me away, but to remind me that love never truly leaves. Keep the window open, my sweet girl. The whispers belong to anyone who still believes in them." Clara pressed the note to her chest. A tear slipped down her cheek, but it was a soft, grateful one. Outside, the willow by the lake swayed gently, as though waving goodbye. Years passed, seasons changed. Clara stayed in the little house by the lane. She became the one by the window, not waiting in sorrow, but watching in peace. Sometimes, at 9 o'clock, the townsfolk would still hear faint music drifting through the air, a waltz so gentle it felt like memory itself. Children would ask, "Who's playing that song?" and Clara would smile, saying, "It's a promise being kept." One night, as she closed her book, she heard it, a whisper, soft and kind. "Thank you for keeping the light on." She turned toward the window, heart full, and whispered back, "Always." The house by the window still stands, its curtains glowing warmly in the moonlight. Some nights, passers-by swear they see two figures, an old woman and a man with a violin, swaying gently in the glow. Others hear only the melody and the quiet murmur of love remembered. But those who listen closely know the truth. Some promises live beyond time. Some whispers never fade. And love, when it's true, becomes the story that never ends. So if you ever find yourself standing by a window, listening to the wind, don't turn away too soon. Perhaps it's not just the breeze you hear. Perhaps it's a whisper meant for you. Watch till the end, because some stories don't end. They simply begin again every time you remember them. Sometimes the things we wait for don't arrive when we expect. But when they finally do, they whisper softly, not loudly. They come as peace, as understanding, as light through the window. If this story touched your heart, let it linger for a moment before you go. And if you felt something tonight, perhaps it was your own whisper calling back. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with me. Until next time, may your nights be calm, your memories kind, and your heart is open to the gentle stories life still wants to tell. Good night, and sweet dreams.